soldiers will support the North West Ambulance Service. Bupa's former Chief Medical Officer, Andrew Valence-Owen, has told GB News the move is positive for the NHS.
People should be reassured that we've had the sense to bring the army in. We saw during the crisis last year that the Nightingale hospitals were almost built and staffed by the army, and they did a brilliant job.
Downing Street says England's new relaxed travel rules won't affect the country's ability to detect COVID variants. Travellers no longer need to take a pre-departure COVID test before returning to England from today, but they must do a lateral flow test when they arrive. Industry expert Paul Charles told GB News that previous travel restrictions were not effective.
The government felt, from a health point of view, they had to introduce these tough, onerous restrictions from the outset. They haven't worked. They haven't stopped Omicron coming into the UK.
Labour MP Jack Dromey has died suddenly at his flat in Birmingham. He was 73. It's understood he died of natural causes. The Labour Party has issued a statement on behalf of his family and his wife, who is long-serving Labour MP Harriet Harman, saying he'd been a dedicated MP for Birmingham Erdington since 2010 and will be greatly missed. One of Scotland's 2 nuclear power plants has now permanently shut down almost 46 years after it started generating electricity. Hunterston B in North Ayrshire provided jobs for thousands of people in the area. Officials say a failure to solve the problem of hundreds of cracks surrounding the reactor core meant its closure was inevitable. And Hollywood actor Sir Sidney Poitier has died. He was 94. The Bahamian-American star won an Oscar for Best Actor for his role in Lilies of the Field. He was the first black man to win the coveted award, helping to pave the way for generations of African-American actors. Whoopi Goldberg is among those paying tribute, saying, "Poitier showed us to reach for the stars." And Lenny Kravitz says, Sir Sidney Poitier, the doors you opened and paths you created will continue to make way for those with a dream. You show the world that with vision and grace, all is possible. You're right, up to date now. Back to Alastair.
Karen, thank you. Now, you might think the House of Commons Library sounds a dry old place where MPs while away the hours thumbing through obscure texts. It is not. It's a brilliant source of information and has just emptied a can of kerosene all over a smouldering row at the heart of the Conservative Party. It's published a paper that shows that more than 1.2 million people will be paying the higher rate of tax of 40p in the pound by 2026. It results from Chancellor Rishi Sunak's decision in his March budget last year to freeze the personal tax allowance and higher rate tax threshold until 2026. Put simply, the allowance is the amount of money that you can earn before paying any tax, around £12,500 at the moment. And the threshold is the amount at which you start paying a higher rate. In March 2021, it was £50,270, and that is where it will stay until 2026. By way of a background reference, in my view, 2 of the most significant Tory budgets were Nigel Lawson's in 1988, when he cut both the standard and the higher rates of income tax, urging folk to work hard, earn more and keep more. And then again, the 2010 budget, when George Osborne sharply raised the amount that people could earn before paying any tax. He also pledged to keep doing it. 1988 was pure Thatcherism. 2010 was the era of the Tory Lib Dem coalition, but both were grounded in that central belief that Tory government should tax as little as possible and urge folk to work and earn as much as possible. Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have managed to annoy swathes of MPs on their own side. When Brexit Minister Lord Frost resigned from the Cabinet last month, he mentioned high taxation as one of his major concerns. The rates of tax haven't risen, but freezing the allowances has a similar effect, without the vicious headlines. That's why Jake Berry, a former minister and chair of the Northern Research Group of Tory MPs, says it is little more than a stealth tax. Another Tory MP, Craig McKinley, said it was not too late for the Chancellor to change his mind. Well, the Chancellor batted that away, saying, and I quote, "It's always easier to duck difficult decisions, but I don't think that that's the responsible thing to do." But there was also a warning from the Tory MP Andrew Bridgen, who not only said the Chancellor would come under increasing pressure to scrap the NIC's rise, but also suggested that the Tories could suffer at the local elections in May if the government doesn't act. It gets worse if you're a low-tax, low-spend Tory, because the freeze in tax allowance are there, the brother and sister of the rise in national insurance payments, which, as I said, will kick in April this year. That was justified as a means of raising desperately needed money for solving the crisis in social care, once and for all. But it won't. The bulk will initially go to the NHS. As Number 10 explained, and I quote, "All of us have been affected by the backlog in our NHS. This money, this £13 billion that the levy will raise, will go in the first instance towards tackling that backlog." And social care? What about social care? I quote again. "In the longer term," Number 10 explained, "it will also tackle another fundamental issue that has been left aside for too long, which is the unfairness in our current social care system. In the long term." So, as Jake Berry said of the threshold move, you might argue that the rise in national insurance had something stealthy about it too. Outside of Parliament, these twin measures on top of rising inflation have few friends either. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said people faced a squeeze this year that could well be worse than the financial crisis. And Torsten Bell of the Resolution Foundation suggested the tax allowance freeze at the starting point would, and I quote, "mean an additional 1.5 million people on low pay will be dragged into paying income tax." Labour are lapping it up, with Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury Pat McFadden saying, "The Tories' national insurance rise, along with other tax hikes, is leaving working people with the biggest tax burden in 70 years. Finally, there are those who might seek to succeed the Prime Minister. It is reported that, in addition to Jacob Rees-Mogg, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, also has her doubts about these impositions. No resignation, however, like Lord Frost, and perhaps just a little more circumspect than Jacob Rees-Mogg. But the fact that she may face the author of those plans, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, in any post-Boris Johnson battle to be boss, is also worth noting. Finally, difficult decisions do need strong justification. If these were debt and deficit cutting measures, well, they might find more friends on the Tory backbenches, painful though they would still be. But they aren't, so they won't. That they run counter to the Tories' 2019 manifesto is but water under the bridge these days, but it remains a fact. The real gamble seems to me that it nibbles away at that central Tory mantra of low tax, low spend, a vessel of clear blue water if ever there was one. And when Pat McFadden, no wild Corbynite, but an experienced and wise opposition player, can say the Tories are imposing the biggest tax burden in 70 years, they shouldn't need to go to the House of Commons library to see that they have a profound problem. Well, joining me now to discuss that, first of all, is Danielle Boxel, spokesperson for the Taxpayers Alliance. Danielle, good to see you as always. Given the state of the public finances, do you think that the Tories are doing what they used to call the prudent thing?
No, I don't think it's the prudent thing to be increasing taxes. I actually think it's completely the wrong measure at this time, because what the effect of tax rises is that it stagnates growth. And what we really need right now coming out of the pandemic is increased growth. And you mentioned the national insurance increase in your monologue there, Alastair. But of course, that's not just a tax on employees, it's also a tax on employers. So it's going to make the cost of hiring more expensive for businesses that have had a disastrous last 24 months. So, this is going to mean that these businesses, they're already feeling the squeeze from sort of lost incomes over the last 2 years. They're now going to be seeing the cost of hiring people more expensive. So it's going to mean that they're not going to be growing, they're not going to be employing more people, and they're not going to be increasing wages at a time when people are really struggling with the cost of living, which is only going to go up.
But given the coronavirus and pretty well unconfined spending, something had to be done on revenue raising. Otherwise, the public finances would be totally out of control.
But I don't buy the argument that the only way to raise revenue is through tax rises alone. Of course, there's but by cutting taxes, you can actually raise revenue in the long term, as when people have more money in their back pockets, they feel more inclined to spend, which in turn raises more revenue over the long term. But there's also this idea that, if you want to raise more revenue, you can do it through cuts in other ways as well. I mean, the government, last year we found that the government wasted £5.6 billion. Now, that money could be used elsewhere. That could be used on helping out the NHS backlog, which we've talked about before. So I don't buy this idea that the only way to raise money is through increasing taxes.
So you're with Jacob Rees-Mogg when he is reported to have argued in the Cabinet that the way forward should be to cut further spending. But putting it to you quite bluntly, what is there left to cut?
Well, as I mentioned, there's an awful lot of waste going on in government at the moment. And that's not the only area that could be changed. I mean, the private sector does contribute to the public sector. So why should the public sector be entitled to more annual leave than the private sector? If we had a cap on annual leave entitlements in the public sector, that would raise £3 billion a year. So there's lots of elements where you could sort of tweak around the edges, as it were, that would save a lot of money in the long term. And I don't think the government's really looking at these areas and trying to find out where it could save money instead of just asking the taxpayers to cough up more.
Let me ask for your comment as well on another couple of things I mentioned in that monologue, if I may. On the tax thresholds, the move lacks clarity, even honesty, of a straight rate rise. Is that philosophically damaging as much as you've argued that it's economically damaging?
Yes, and it's not just philosophically damaging, it's politically damaging as well, because we found in October, we did some polling, and it seems that the public don't trust the government on taxes anymore. The Tories are now not seen as the party of low tax. In fact, there's more people that think Labour are the party of low tax. So, this is really hitting home to a lot of people. And when the tax rises come in April, I think it's really going to politically damage the Conservative Party.
Well, add to that list, I mentioned Pat McFadden's clever observation in the monologue as well, but there's also Reform UK, New Kids on the Block, getting maybe 4%, occasionally 5% in the opinion polls. They are talking specifically about lower taxes, lower spending and less regulation. They're not going to form the next government, but they could stop the Tories forming the next government.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that want to vote for a party that's calling for lower tax. And if they damage the Tories in the local elections in May, then perhaps, hopefully, that will actually encourage the party to cut taxes if that does actually happen. So, we've seen cabinet ministers arguing for it, but it doesn't seem to have got anywhere. Perhaps further action needs to be taken and people need to vote with their feet and say, we don't really like what's going on at the moment. And we should be giving the Tory party a real message about what we want from our government.
Quality economics and quality politics, as always. Danielle, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Danielle Boxel from the Taxpayers Alliance. Next up, Sam Collins, Senior Policy Advisor at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Sam, always good to see you. Same opening question as I put to Danielle. Given the state of the public finances, something that you care passionately about, did Sunak actually have a choice?
I mean, there's always a choice when it comes to tax rises. I think Danielle spoke about some of the options previously. There are so many things that the government could potentially be cutting. I mean, £206 billion is still spent on quangos, for example. There's whole departments that could potentially be got rid of if the government was willing to look at really radical changes that would allow us to bring down the tax bill and help ordinary working people survive the cost of living increase.
It's interesting, isn't it? You mentioned there a specific number and quangos, and Danielle talked about examples where savings could be made as well. I'm just intrigued to know where you identify the constituency in support of that. Rees-Mogg nodded to it, McKinley's on the record about it, Bridgen's on the record about it, but these aren't sufficient numbers. Jake Berry is perhaps in that respect even more significant.
I agree, and there is although they are very quiet a lot of the time, there is a very significant constituency within the Conservative Party, both within Parliament and without, that want a smaller government, lower taxes, less intervention in both the economy and in our lives. And I think we're going to start to hear that voice become a lot stronger as we get towards the next election, especially if Reform UK start really picking up support.
Yeah, and as I said, I agree with that as well. As I said to Daniel, I think it's unlikely, I'll eat my hat if I'm wrong, that they'll form a government. But like UKIP, they could nibble away in the margins, and they are making specifically that argument. Let me put this to you. How damaging economically is a rising tax burden as we desperately seek growth after more than 2 years of the coronavirus?
I mean, it's just disastrous. Businesses and individuals are desperately crying out for tax relief. You're seeing people, the cost of living burden is going up significantly. You've got energy bills going up. You've got inflation going up. Just across the board, people desperately need support. And the government can't do a lot on some of the cost of living increases. Obviously, perhaps 10 years ago, they could have done something that would have improved the wholesale cost of energy at this point. But there's no switch the government can push now. But what they can do is start bringing down the tax burden and helping these people out. On a wider economic level, the tax burden is a huge problem. It's money that isn't going back into the economy. It's money that's not being invested in more employees, new infrastructure. It's all going to the government, and some of that is, I suppose, going back into the economy through the welfare budget. But there's a whole churn. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but there's a significant percentage, up to 10 or 20% of money that's lost as it gets churned through the government. So it's not just money in, money out. There's a lot of wastage.
Yeah. One other matter that I specifically didn't raise with Danielle because I wanted to save it for you, and that is the mantra of borrowing. Until recently, there was virtually no charge to borrowing, and that's whether it's your mortgage, my mortgage, or Her Majesty's government massive debt. It's now creeping up here and abroad. As those interest rates begin to go up, then borrowing ceases to be an easy, cheap option for the government.
You're absolutely right. And this is something that organisations like the IEA have been crying out about for the last 10 years. You've had people, especially on the political left, but worryingly on the political right as well, saying, oh no, we can just spend the money because it doesn't cost us anything. We're never going to see interest rates go up. We can just put it all on the credit cards and not worry about it in the future. And unfortunately, some of those are coming home to roost. You can't. Some of those chickens are coming home to roost. You can't just keep borrowing money. And unfortunately, we're going to see the impact of that over the next 5, 10, 20 years as there's less money in the government budgets for things that people actually need and care about, because more and more money is going to go on debt interest. Every small country in the world has had to deal with this at some point over the past 50 years. And unfortunately now, with coronavirus and the financial crisis, it's starting to catch up to big countries like the UK as well.
Final point, and it's a cheeky one, and if, depending upon your answer, it may even be a first. Torsten Bell of the Resolution Foundation, slightly different part of the political spectrum to you, said that this could prove for ordinary people, taxpayers, workers, the poor, as well as the middle income group, worse than the financial crisis of 2007-8. Do you agree with him?
As a matter of fact, I do. I mean, it's a problem that's been growing over the past. I mean, I would actually almost put this as part of the same grand economic event. I think that if the government had been in a different type. Sorry, let me try that again. if the government had not gone through all of the big changes that they, had not grown, had not raised taxes over the past 10 years in response to the financial crisis, then I think we would be in a lot healthier position now, and we would have been in 2020. You look at countries like Australia and New Zealand that went into COVID with significantly lower levels of borrowing. They've been able to spend a lot more money and keep their economies in a lot healthier state. We didn't. We went into COVID with vastly greater levels of borrowing, and so I think he's right that the impact on this occasion will hurt ordinary people more. But I think that you can't separate the two events.
No, understood. All right, that is a first. Institute of Economic Affairs agreeing with the Resolution Foundation, I suspect. I'm an admirer of both organisations. Sam, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. So there you have it. Economic thoughts as well as political nuances about those moves. The battle will continue on the backbenches, but whether Sunak shifts or not, Ahimadoots. After the break, how significant was it that 200 military personnel were seen to be helping the NHS in London today? But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello, it's looking rather changeable across the UK through this weekend, with some heavy rain and some strong winds for many parts on Saturday. Sunshine and showers, though, by Sunday, and temperatures will be a little bit higher than they have been of late. If we look at the pressure pattern then, you can see the reason why. This frontal system will continue to spread in from the west over the next 24 hours, bringing that heavy rain and strong winds. But ahead of it, some quite cold air in place across the UK. So as we see rain clearing eastern parts, a real risk of some icy patches across parts of England, with a warning in force for that. But cloud will thicken as we head through the night as rain spreads its way eastward. Some of that rain could be quite heavy, and we could see a spell of snow across high ground in northern England and Scotland for a time once again. It'll still be cold in the east, but further towards the west, those temperatures will lift through the night, so turning noticeably milder as we head through the early hours of Saturday morning. So we get off to a rather wet start on Saturday morning, a really quite disappointing start to the weekend, really. Some quite heavy rain around, still some snow across high ground of Scotland for a time, and particularly heavy rain across South Wales and southwest England through the day, and still those strong winds accompany that rain as well. Now gradually that will clear the southeast later on in the day, and behind it brighter, sunnier skies, still a rash of showers though, and again wintry across parts of the north, and still staying windy with gales towards the southwest. A milder day though, like I said. Now through the rest of Saturday into the evening and overnight, still a mixture then by this point of clear spells and showers. Some of the showers again could be quite heavy, particularly towards the north and the west, still wintry over higher ground in particular, but in those clear skies with that cold air in place once again, it will turn chilly. Temperatures in towns and cities probably hovering just above freezing, but colder than that in the countryside. So again, we could see some frost and ice around. So as we start Sunday morning, then generally a brighter start to the day compared to Saturday morning. Some sunshine first thing. Still, though, some showers towards the north and the west. Again, wintry in places. Through the day, some of those showers will start to feed their way eastwards, and we could see a more organised band of rain and hill snow through the afternoon. Temperatures a little bit lower than they will be on Saturday. I think feeling chilly if you're in those showers. Quick look ahead to the early part of next week. Then a lot of cloud around, some patchy rain in places, but gradually turning drier through the week and staying mild.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. The Armed Forces have sent 200 personnel into NHS hospitals across London to help plug staff shortages. The Minister of Defence have provided 40 defence medics and 160 general duty personnel for the next 3 weeks. Hospitals in London have been hit hard by staff absences, with thousands off sick or isolating as the Omicron variant surged across the capital. Well, to discuss that, I'm delighted to be joined now by Dr. Peter Carter, former CEO of the Royal College of Nursing and Vice President of the Institute of Customer Service. Peter, good to see you. The number of NHS workers on sick leave, is that tricky or is it catastrophic from your experience?
Well, I'm afraid to say it's catastrophic. You've got 3,874 people off sick in London hospitals. So drafting in 200 army personnel is going to be a drop in the ocean. Now, those 200 will work very hard, and the 40 of them are medically trained, and they'll be of immense help on the wards and departments they're working in. But it's a tiny contribution towards what is a major crisis facing the NHS in London. And it's a similar picture across the 4 countries of the UK.
Indeed, the fact that there were 60 in Scotland was pointed out to me on social media as well. But looking at these pictures of servicemen and women, it's worth remembering that there are already a lot of them out there helping with jab centres and things like that. Do you sense that the Ministry of Defence have reached the limit of what they can offer the NHS?
Yeah, look, there's not a lot of slack in the system in the army. And certainly when you had the 2 major conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, the medical defence services were highly dependent on reservists who already work in the NHS. And I went out to Iraq and I also went to Afghanistan. And on the times I went there, the 2 deployments, the field hospitals were staffed almost entirely by people from the NHS. So the Army Medical Defence Services are actually quite small. As I say, it's fortunate that we haven't got 2 major conflicts going on at the moment, and it's right that those people are redeployed to help out the NHS. But as I said, look, it's a drop in the ocean. 40 medics in London, 160 backup staff, all doing good work compared to nearly 4,000 people off sick. It's not really going to make that big a difference, Alastair.
Nearly, you said 3,874, I think, in London.
Yeah.
Jeremy Hunt's Health and Social Care Committee reported very recently that in addition to those COVID sicknesses and perfectly reasonable days off, and we don't want them infecting folk, that there is an estimated 93,000 vacancies within the NHS anyway, and widespread shortages. So you said you think that the COVID situation is pretty catastrophic, but when we wrestle with waiting list problems and there are 93,000 vacancies, I mean, the government at best are putting a brave face on this, aren't they?
Well, they are indeed. And also what they're also doing is they're disregarding the catastrophic effects of the cuts in the NHS in the first few years of the coalition government. By way of example, because we've been talking about London, in 2012, there were 2,000 training places per year for nurses. That got cut by 25% to 1,500. Now, 2,000 was barely enough to stand still to cope with retirements. So by cutting it by 25% to 1,500, London is now paying the price for that. So they're playing catch up. And it's what I called when I was at the Royal College of Nursing, yo-yo workforce planning. They make these cuts to save money, but ultimately it costs lives and it puts the services under greater pressure than it had been before. And because of what's now gone on with COVID, there is no slack in the system. If those 90,000 vacancies were filled, there would be a bit of a cushion to be able to cope with this. And that's why so many hospitals are now declaring that they're in a critical state. And that means they're going to have to cancel even more elective surgery. So those waiting lists, which are already huge, will increase that much more. And it's going to be very commonplace for people waiting for hips, knees, hernias, and many other conditions to be waiting 2, 3, and God forbid, maybe as long as 4 years. Those people, their health will deteriorate even more. So it's a pretty desperate state of affairs.
The other thing that literally terrifies me, and you know this, having previously been the boss of the Royal College of Nursing, but it applies to nurses, junior doctors, let alone consultants. It takes years to train up good men and women who want to do that job. So extending waiting lists and what have you, you're talking about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years before we can get fully up to steam.
It will be many years. And as I said, and the problem is, the longer you're waiting, the more your condition will deteriorate. So even something as relatively nowadays straightforward as a hip replacement, the longer you're waiting for that, the more deterioration there will be of the capsule, the more mobility problems that you will have, and people will end up having problems with their knees, their backs. So it's a downward spiral. And this is now, we are now reaping the bitter harvest of those short-term cuts, particularly in the 2010, 2011, 2012 era, which is causing these huge problems, compounded by COVID, but it would have been difficult even at the best times. We're now dependent on going overseas to recruit people. There's nothing wrong with people coming from overseas, but for me, there's something ethically wrong with going off to developing countries and raiding their impoverished health services that they've paid to train these people in order to bail out our service. So we're going to be dependent on overseas recruitment for years to come. And the other thing, Alastair, to say, and I know your viewers, too many stats just probably befuddles people, but there are 700,000 nurses and midwives on the register. 150,000 of those are over the age of 55. And in the next 5 to 6 years, they are going to retire. I mean, it's absolutely irrefutable. They will retire. So the workforce crisis will get even worse. And I absolutely commend Jeremy Hunt, the former Secretary of State, who's been doing a lot of work with the Health Select Committee, and I think he's been doing a very good job there, who is calling on his own government to now do something proper and constructive about workforce planning and to publish exactly where we are. So it's a very, very depressing and very bleak state of affairs. Having said that, and I've been to 2 hospitals this week, I am so impressed with not just nurses, but it's people like porters, domestics, receptionists, physiotherapists, doctors, I could go on. Really all hands to the pump, really pulling out all the stops. But the exhaustion factor is something which is really taking its toll.
Sure. Well, let me finish by merely echoing what you said about Jeremy Hunt, former Health Secretary, who as chair of that select committee seems to be on the case, and let us hope that there are folk who are listening to him. For the time being, Peter Carter, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for joining us this Friday evening. That's Dr. Peter Carter, the former CEO of the Royal College of Nursing. Now, schools in England are, and I quote, teetering on the edge, with more than a third struggling with staff absence rates in excess of 10%. That's according to a snap poll by head teachers. Earlier this week, the chairman of Ofqual, that's the Office of Qualifications and Examinations Regulation, Ian Bowcombe, proposed several timetable changes, one of which included suspending specialist subjects like PE and music to free up staff members. Well, it caused furore, letters to the Times, the Telegraph, all over the place. Not quite in perfect harmony. So joining me now to discuss it, I'm delighted to say, are Anis Garfield, former GCSE and A-level examiner in English literature and classical studies for nearly 30 years, and Lauren Elliott, an expert in children's music education and director of Music Monsters. Anis, let me come to you first of all. The boss of Ofqual's suggestion was about protecting core subjects like English. As a former English examiner, surely you'd agree that that's the right thing to do in extremis.
It is. And how do you define the core subjects? Are they English, maths and science? And they should be continued. But unlike in the National Health Service, I think the education system is lucky in that if the teachers have COVID, they may have to stay at home, but they are well enough, not unwell in a lot of cases, well enough to have their year programme implemented from their homes into the schools. And I think we must keep our children on their normal programme of subjects for their examinations. We're talking about secondary, of course, aren't we? We're talking about GCSE and A-levels, are we?
I believe so, yes. But let me bring Lauren in at that point just to answer that one. So, Lauren, what is your argument then? Because that seemed to me to be perfectly lucid, and as a serial parent, I can see the logic of it. But I also had a daughter who was a music scholar. What do we lose in the education of our children if we say, just for the time being, music and PE and stuff like that is put on pause?
I think that really, if we do that now, we need to consider how the future is going to look without musicians, without dancers, without artists, without filmmakers. And for me, that really is a future that is very bleak. How devastating would it be if our rich and long culture that we've carried forth for thousands of years comes to an end now just because we don't put the importance on this subject and we don't give those children the chance and the opportunities that they deserve. Music, drama, dance, these are all subjects that offer so much more than they first appear. They teach children to practice, to persevere, to persist. They improve their social skills. They teach them spatial awareness. They increase their maths and their English skills. They are fun and they offer that welcome relief that we all need right now, more so than ever before, and especially our children who are now 2 years into so much disruption to their education and their lives.
Anis, answer that one if you will, but also let me add to it the fact that everybody from the Secretary of State for Education, Robert Halfon, the chair of the Select Committee, and heads and teachers all talk about the mental health and well-being of children. Surely they need exactly what Lauren just said, a little levity as well in their education.
Of course, and with any luck, music could continue. If headmasters could abandon their bureaucratic paperwork and come and teach in the classes themselves, the pupils would love it. You must maintain the normality for children of going to school, having their normal subjects. If some of the subjects with initials, I always get in a muddle, PSC or something, they could perhaps come behind music. Of course, music must continue. And if they're going on, you have a daughter who did music, a music scholar, it would be, our children have one go through their education system. We can fiddle about with it as much as we like, but they have one go. And if you damage that program, they will suffer, we will all suffer. Yeah. But I think if we could get the teachers who have COVID, who have to stay at home, to send in and get the specialist teachers or the headmaster or the deputy headmaster to come and teach themselves, you could maintain that normality and preserve the pupils, remove the anxiety that they're not going to be taught well enough for their revision, for their exams this year.
got you on that, and I love the idea of getting these administrators and managers to come in and do a bit of teaching too. They'd love it. I can tell you they'd love it. Lauren, with Music Monsters, there's also a very strong argument that some of this could be done outside of school, and whether it's youth clubs or music clubs or stuff like that. It doesn't actually have to be in school. Are we missing a trick here in having the school thing doing its thing, but also having a vibrant external series of activities?
I think I can see the argument. However, we provide lessons both within schools and outside of school, and this means that we are able to access a whole range of children, and that so many youngsters are able to get this opportunity. As soon as you take it outside of the school, it then becomes there's a problem with inclusion and accessibility, and we find that the children that are able to have these music lessons are those that can either afford it, or those that live in areas that offer it, or those whose families support it at all. If we take it out of the schools, then we are just widening the gap between those that have and those that have not.
OK, we've got about a minute and a half left, so I've got one question. I'll stick with Lauren and then come to Anis for the final word. The curriculum can often be seen as a kind of political bucket. People chuck stuff in it left, right and centre. Do you think, as with so many things, the coronavirus has, the disruption to schools, given a chance to have a fundamental rethink of the curriculum, what we send our little darlings to school to learn? Lauren Elliott.
Yes, I think there is that opportunity right now. And actually, if we see it as an opportunity, it can provide a really powerful shake-up, and it can really give us an opportunity as a nation, as a country, to really look at what is being provided in schools, what is being offered to our children, and going forward, what skills do we want them to come out the other side of school with? That's their skills in terms of the jobs that they go into, but also the way that they manage their way through big situations like this one that they've experienced. They have been so resilient, and it's really important that we acknowledge that and that we hone those skills and that we continue to take those forward.
Lauren, thank you for that. Anis Garfield, I mentioned that you examine in English, but you also examine in classics, the great Greek and Latin studies as well. What would you say to my question? Is it time to rethink what we teach these children?
Yes, perhaps, but I would also like to say that we must think of the parents too. The parents want their children in school. Parents can then get on with their jobs. And that, I think, is very important for the children's stability, the family's stability, and the parent. But,
also, never met a parent who doesn't want their children to be able to read, write and do arithmetic either. Lauren and Anis, I've really enjoyed that. Very constructive. I'm delighted that you agreed on quite a bit. I'm perfectly happy that you disagreed on one or two
Lauren's
nuanced
brilliant.
bits.
Keep up the music. That needn't be abandoned.
All right. Anis Garfield there and Lauren Elliott, thank you both very, very much indeed. Great conversation. After the break, we will be paying tribute to the Labour MP Jack Dromey, who has died at the age of 73.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
The Labour Member of Parliament, Jack Dromey, has died aged 73, his family has confirmed. I first met Jack in my student union days in the early 1970s. He was then a rising star of the trade union movement, an old-school socialist and a man of principle. His girlfriend, Harriet Harman, also became an MP and rose above him in the ranks. His loyalty to her and to his party never wavered. A shadow minister who has held his seat of Birmingham Edgbaston since 2010 is understood to have died in his constituency home this morning. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle said MPs were all in disbelief that the life force that was Jack Dromey has died, calling it another sad day for the House and a bad start to the year. He leaves behind fellow Labour MP, of course, Harriet Harman, who said that she's going to retire at the end of this session, and his 3 children. Jack appeared on GB News just before Christmas, speaking about his wife's legacy in politics.
Utterly remarkable. 40 years in the House of Commons, where the issues affecting half the population, women, never seriously featured in British politics. She has transformed the image and agenda of politics more generally and of the Labour Party in particular, and can be rightly proud of what she has achieved.
And just yesterday, in a debate in the House of Commons in the Westminster Hall, he made reference to our debt to the people of Afghanistan, and that when we got people out, it was Britain at its finest. Jack Dromey, who has died. Well, joining me now is the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, good of you to join us. In many respects, Jack was of another era. A trade unionist first and foremost, he rose to fame.
Yes, that's right. And he had perhaps several political lives. He was Deputy General Secretary of TGWU. That ultimately became Unite, which we've all heard of. At one point, TGWU had nearly 1 million members in the UK, so it was really a huge force. He went on to become a Labour MP and a frontbencher under several leaders of the opposition, Ed Miliband, Corbyn and Keir Starmer. But he also had a huge and rich history as a trade unionist, and perhaps viewers may not be so familiar with the Grundwick Strike at the end of the 1970s in a film processing factory in London. And that's really one of the things that helped fire him towards national attention. And that really gave him a huge trade union legacy years before he went on to become a Labour MP as well.
I'd hate to confess it because it gives my age away, but I do remember it very, very clearly. And I also remember that the Grundwick episode was all about union recognition. It was about sustaining the right, as Jack saw it, and many people still see it, of men and women to join a trade union if they want to. So he wasn't just one of those smart-suited trade unionists who like their big offices. He was a guy who was down there at the cutting edge of it all.
Yes, he was very visible at the Grundwick Strike, and that went on for 2 years. It's perhaps hard to imagine that now, where the labour market's a bit different. It's hard to imagine a strike going on for 2 years through thick and thin and winter. And of course, the cause of that was a series of discriminatory measures around race, but also around employment rights for largely women from South Asia. And perhaps today, the idea of discriminating against someone in the workplace because of their gender or their race would be outrageous. But actually, we're talking 40 odd years ago, this was a huge battle, hugely controversial. Jack Dromey at the forefront of it, went on for 2 years in what was very much a noble cause. So he deserves huge credit for what he achieved both then, as you said, on the front line, and later at TGWU, which became Unite, and then as a Labour MP.
Final point, and I say it because it matters, and I'm sure that he would want us to be open about it. He had tricky times as treasurers of the Labour Party with mysterious donations. And he claimed at the time that he didn't know what was going on in that area. And I believed him at the time, and I still do. That was the shift into big party funding, not just from the trade unions, but from individuals, that has perhaps got us into so much trouble nowadays. But he really hated that aspect of it, didn't he?
Yes, that perhaps wasn't the background he came from. He was a credible and honest figure to me then, and he still is now. And on that particular issue of donations, he was very clear in saying those had been made to the Labour Party without his knowledge. So I think, yes, there was some media controversy around that, and he did give quite a full set of answers. And I think his legacy today is a very positive one of being a Birmingham MP for well over a decade, the Grundwick Strike, and a proud trade unionist, but also, and obviously I know a few people in the Labour Party, actually as a decent, humane, honest, hard-working guy of integrity as well.
Let's end it on that, Peter. Lovely tribute. Thank you very much indeed for finding time for us this Friday evening. Now, a story for all of you scientists out there. Astronomers have for the first time taken pictures of the dying moments in the life of a red supergiant star. It was spotted just 130 days before exploding, using 2 telescopes in Hawaii, allowing a team of researchers to study it before it exploded further into a supernova. Now, these types of pictures could become even more common with the launch of the James Webb Telescope. It will be able to give us a further look into the universe, even further than we've ever seen before. I'm delighted to be joined now by space expert Andy Lound. Tell me this, Andy, why are the death throes of this star so exciting and so important?
Good evening. Yes, partly because we've never seen the build-up to a supernova before. We've sort of captured them when they're in the process of doing it, but we've actually been observing this star, or the scientists were observing this star prior to it going off, and that's really important. Red giants are stars 10 times the mass of our sun. They burn up their hydrogen very quickly, converting it into helium. Then it starts to process the helium, if you like, fusing helium into heavy elements. Surrounding that, there is still hydrogen, which is also processing and is also turning into helium. And that causes these stars to swell up to red giant size. And they race through their life cycle. So what you end up doing is then it burns up its material and then suddenly explodes in this fantastic sight. But we look at a lot of these stars and we're wondering, what is the buildup? Is there a key to when it's about to trigger? And for the first time we've seen that. For a period of time before this star actually exploded, there was an increase in brightness in it. And they've been able now not only just to chart that increase in brightness to the point it exploded, but able to actually draw a proper graph, draw proper data. So we now have firm physical build up to the explosion of a red giant star. Now, this star was over 100 million light years away. But we have some of these red giants on our doorstep, such as Betelgeuse, or if you like Betelgeuse, I don't mind. Big red star in Orion. You can go out tonight and have a look at it. Now, that is only just over 500 light years away.
Which, let me butt in. We've only got a minute left. I didn't want to interrupt because I was loving every minute of that. But I'm a huge fan of the Hubble telescope, and I've got that brilliant Cosmos book on my coffee table. How significant is James Webb in capturing exactly those images that you were just about to go on to describe as far as Betelgeuse is concerned?
Very important, because it's going to be able to look deep into space and look at the very earliest stars and probably get some of the earliest indications of how these stars actually formed and what their life cycles are. So that's going to be really important, because all the heavy elements, the likes of material that you and I are made out of, carbon, iron and oxygen and so on, all came from the explosion of these stars. So we'll be able to see these primordial stars which punch the material into space that originally formed us. So the new James Webb Telescope is going to give us more of an insight. And of course, it's going to give us more fine data on these giant explosions, which are going to be quite fantastic. It's going to open a new universe to us from the middle of this year.
In 30 seconds, at the heart of it is it's proving what you theoreticians always thought was the case, because now we can see it.
Oh, yes, that's the point. We now have the physical evidence to support all the numbers, all the maths and all our ideas. We now have the physical evidence which we can see for ourselves, which show we're on the right lines, which show we've got the calculations right. And that is absolutely fantastic because it shows the science is good and is correct, and we get an idea of our beginnings and perhaps give us an indication of where we're going.
Andy, it is always a genuine pleasure, and thank you so much for finding time for us. Andy Loud there, capturing pictures of what we all thought was possible, but now we can prove it. And a black hole really does look like a donut. Next up, Mark Dolan. But from me, I'll see you tomorrow at noon.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello, it's looking rather changeable across the UK through this weekend with some heavy rain and some strong winds for many parts on Saturday. Sunshine and showers though by Sunday, and temperatures will be a little bit higher than they have been of late. If we look at the pressure pattern then, you can see the reason why.